Rain hammered the carriage roof like 100 small fists, and Clara hardly pressed herself into the corner of the seat, her heart slamming so hard she thought the driver might hear it over the storm. Behind her, somewhere on the dark road, a horse screamed and a man's voice shouted her name. She did not look back. She could not afford to look back. 3 days earlier, she had been folding linens in a quiet house, believing her life belonged to her. Now she belonged to no one, and everyone who had ever claimed to love her wanted her found. Her guardian, Alistair Crane, had raised his hand to her one final time, and something inside her had simply refused to bend again. She had taken her mother's ring, a small bag of coins, and the address of a distant cousin who worked in a great house far to the north. She had not slept in 2 days. She was not sure she remembered how. The carriage lurched over a rut and threw her against the door. Outside, lightning cracked the sky open, and for one white second she saw the shape of the estate rising out of the hills like something carved from the storm itself. Towers, iron gates, windows dark except for one, high up, burning steady and gold against all that black. The driver did not slow as they passed through the gates. If anything, he seemed eager to be rid of her, and Clara understood why the moment the great doors of Ravenscroft opened, and the housekeeper stepped out into the rain to meet her. The housekeeper's name was Mrs. Prout, a narrow woman with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. She looked Clara over the way a farmer looks over livestock at market, then sighed as though Clara's arrival confirmed some private disappointment. "You're the new companion, then, Miss Hartley?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're late, and soaked through. Come in before you catch your death, though I don't doubt his lordship would consider that a mercy on his household budget." Clara followed her inside, water dripping from the hem of her coat onto marble floors so polished she could see her own frightened face reflected back at her. The entrance hall soared 3 stories above her head, hung with portraits of stern men and silent women, all of them watching her with painted eyes. "Who is he?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. "The Duke, what is he like?" Mrs. Prout's steps did not slow, but something in her shoulders went stiff. "You'll meet him soon enough. When you do, keep your eyes down, answer only what's asked, and do not, under any circumstance, mention his brother. Do you understand me?" "His brother? Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." They climbed a staircase wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast, then turned down a corridor lined with closed doors. At the end of it, a single door stood open, spilling lamplight onto the floor. Mrs. Prout knocked once, waited for nothing, and pushed Clara gently but firmly through it. The study was warm and smelled of old paper and burning wood. A man stood at the window with his back to her, tall, dressed in black, his hands clasped behind him like a soldier awaiting orders. He did not turn around right away, and Clara had the strange sensation of being studied by someone who had not yet looked at her. "The new companion," Mrs. Prout said, "Miss Clara Hartley." "Leave us." His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need to rise to fill a room. Mrs. Prout left without another word, and the door clicked shut behind her, and Clara stood alone with the Duke of Ravenscroft for the first time. When he finally turned, she found herself unable to look away. He was younger than she had expected, though his eyes carried the weight of a much older man, dark and unreadable, set in a face that might have been handsome if it had ever learned how to soften. He looked at her the way one might look at an unexpected bill, something to be dealt with and then forgotten. "You come with no letters of reference," he said. "No family name anyone in this county would recognize. My steward tells me you arrived at the gate half drowned and asking for work you did not apply for." "I was told there was a position, sir, for a lady's companion." "There was 3 companions before you have held it. None lasted the month." "Why not?" It was the wrong question, or perhaps the right one asked too soon. His jaw tightened just slightly, and Clara felt the temperature of the room drop, though the fire still burned bright behind him. "That is not your concern. Your concern, should you choose to remain, is my niece. She is 7 years old. She does not speak to strangers and she does not trust easily, and if you frighten her, or tire of her, or leave the way the others left, you will do it before you have unpacked your bags. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Grace." "You may call me nothing at all if you can manage it. I find conversation with staff to be a waste of time we could both spend elsewhere." The cruelty of it landed clean and precise, like a blade that had been sharpened for exactly this purpose. Clara felt her face heat, felt the old familiar urge to shrink, to apologize for existing in his line of sight. She had spent years learning that urge under Alistair Crane's roof. She had promised herself, in the rain, on the road, that she would not carry it into this new life. So instead of shrinking, she lifted her chin. "I understand, Your Grace. I will try not to waste more of your time than absolutely necessary." Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. Surprise, perhaps, or something closer to respect, quickly buried. "See that you don't," he said, and turned back to the window, and that was the end of the conversation. Mrs. Prout was waiting outside the door, arms folded, and led Clara up another flight of stairs to a small room at the end of a quiet hallway. The bed was narrow but clean. The window looked out over dark gardens she could not yet see, and a fire had already been laid, waiting only for a match. "Well," Mrs. Prout said, "you didn't run out crying. That's more than I can say for the last one." "Is he always like that?" "Like what?" "Cold." Mrs. Prout's face did something complicated, an expression that came and went too fast to read. "His lordship has his reasons. It is not my place to speak of them, and it certainly is not yours to ask. Get some sleep, Miss Hartley. Lily wakes early, and she does not forgive a companion who is late to breakfast." The door closed, and Clara was alone in a strange room in a strange house, hundreds of miles from the only home she had ever known, having just been dismissed by the coldest man she had ever met. She should have felt afraid. In some ways she did. But she also felt something she had not felt in a very long time, sitting on the edge of that narrow bed with rain still ticking against the window glass. She felt safe enough to close her eyes. She did not sleep well that first night. She woke twice to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her door, slow and heavy, packing back and forth as though whoever it was could not decide whether to knock. Both times, the footsteps eventually retreated, and both times, Clara lay rigid in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat, wondering what kind of house she had walked into. Morning came gray and quiet. She dressed in her one presentable dress, still damp from the night before, and made her way downstairs following the smell of bread and the sound of a child's voice, high and insistent, arguing with someone about porridge. The dining room was smaller than she expected, warmer too, with a fire already crackling, and a little girl seated at the long table, swinging her legs beneath her chair and glaring at a bowl in front of her as though it had personally wronged her. "I don't like it with the skin on top," the girl was saying to a maid who looked at the end of her patience. "Uncle Edmund lets me scrape it off." "Uncle Edmund isn't here, miss." "Then I'll wait for him." Clara stepped into the doorway, and the girl's head turned so fast her dark curls swung with the motion. Lily. She had her uncle's same watchful eyes, the same instinct to study a stranger before deciding whether they were safe. "Who are you?" Lily asked without preamble. "My name is Clara. I'm going to be your companion if that's all right with you." The others weren't very fun. One of them cried all the time. "Are you going to cry all the time?" "I hope not," Clara said, and something in her voice must have carried honesty, because Lily's suspicious expression eased just slightly into something more curious. "Do you know how to skip stones?" "I used to, a long time ago." "There's a pond. Uncle Edmund used to take me, but he's always busy now. Maybe you could take me instead." Maybe I could. It was such a small thing, a child's simple request. But Clara felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight since the moment she'd climbed into that carriage in the storm. Here, at least, was someone who did not look at her like a burden or a bill to be paid. Here was someone who simply wanted a friend. She sat down beside Lily, and together they scraped the skin off the porridge, and outside the rain finally stopped, and for one small hour Clara let herself believe that perhaps this strange, cold house might still hold something worth staying for. She did not yet know how much it would cost her to find out. She did not yet know that the man who had dismissed her so easily the night before would, before the year was through, become the only person in the world she trusted with her life. She knew only that the porridge was good, that Lily's laugh was easy and bright, and that somewhere above them, in a study that smelled of old paper and old grief, a man stood at his window and watched the gardens where a woman he had barely spoken to now walked with the niece he loved more than his own life, and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that was not quite loneliness. It would take him much longer to admit what it was. 2 weeks passed at Ravenscroft, and Clara began to learn the shape of its silences. The house ran on rules no one spoke aloud but everyone obeyed. No one mentioned the portrait in the East Gallery, a young man with the Duke's same dark eyes but a softer mouth, though Clara caught the housemaids crossing themselves when they passed it. No one lit candles in the nursery wing after dark, though Lily's room was there, and Lily herself seemed to have no fear of the dark at all. And no one, ever, under any circumstance, spoke to the Duke before he spoke first. Clara broke that rule on her 9th day and nothing happened. She had expected thunder. Instead, she found him in the library, standing before a shelf of books he did not appear to be reading, and she asked him, quite plainly, whether Lily was permitted to visit the stables. He looked at her for a long moment, as though the question itself were a kind of trespass. "She is afraid of horses," he said finally. "She told me she wasn't. She is afraid of horses because her father died on one. She will not tell you that because she has decided that admitting fear is the same as admitting weakness, and someone taught her that lesson before I could stop them." Clara absorbed this slowly. Who taught her that? "That is not your concern." He turned back to his books and the conversation was apparently finished. But Clara had learned something that day, something small and important. The Duke of Ravenscroft noticed everything about the 9-year-old girl in his care, down to fears the child herself would not admit to. A man who paid that much attention was not, whatever the rumors claimed, a man without a heart. He was a man guarding one very carefully. She began to watch him after that, not out of duty, but out of a curiosity she could not entirely explain. She noticed that he ate breakfast alone every morning at precisely 7, before Lily woke, as though he could not bear for the child to see him at his least composed. She noticed that he read to Lily most nights, though he thought no one knew, slipping into the nursery after the staff had gone to bed and reading in a low voice through the wall Clara's own room shared with the child's. Stories about knights and dragons, and once, memorably, a very long and detailed explanation of why dragons in the story were not real, and Lily need not worry about them visiting Ravenscroft. She noticed, too, that he flinched, almost imperceptibly, whenever a door slammed too hard, or a servant raised their voice in anger below stairs. It was the same flinch she recognized in her own body, the same old animal alertness that came from years of learning to read a room before the room could hurt you. She wondered, watching him from across the breakfast table one gray morning, what exactly had taught a duke to flinch in his own house. She did not have to wonder much longer. The fire started just after midnight in the east wing, in a room no one used, though the smoke found its way into the corridors before anyone raised the alarm. Clara woke coughing, her eyes stinging, the acrid smell thick enough to taste. She was on her feet and out the door before she had fully understood what was happening, some old instinct from her years with Alistair Crane taking over, the part of her that had learned to move fast and think later. The hallway was full of smoke and running shapes, servants shouting, someone ringing a bell somewhere below. And then, cutting through all of it, a sound that stopped her heart entirely. Lily! She had never heard him raise his voice before. It did not sound like anger. It sounded like something breaking. Clara found him at the end of the corridor, hammering on the nursery door, which had somehow jammed in its frame, smoke curling thick beneath it. His hands were bleeding from the effort, and he did not seem to notice or care. "The window," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "There's a servant's stair on the outside. It leads right past her window. I've seen it from the garden." He looked at her as though she had spoken a foreign language, and then understanding cracked through the panic in his face, and he was moving before she finished the sentence, taking the stairs two at a time with Clara close behind him, out into the cold night air, and around the side of the house to where a narrow iron staircase clung to the stone, built generations ago for servants carrying coal. He went up it faster than Clara had ever seen a person move, and reached the window, and broke the latch with his bare fist without any apparent thought for the pain, and disappeared inside. Clara stood below in the dark, her heart in her throat, counting seconds that felt like years, until his shape appeared again at the window, Lily wrapped tight against his chest, both of them coughing but alive, and he came down the iron stairs slower this time, careful, cradling the girl like something that might shatter if he moved wrong. He set Lily down in the grass, and she clung to his coat and sobbed, and he knelt there holding her with his bleeding hands and did not say a single word, only rocked her slowly while smoke rose orange against the black sky behind them, and Clara stood a few feet away, unable to look away from the sight of a man the whole county called heartless, breaking open completely for the sake of a child who was not even his own. It was only later, after the fire had been put out, after the physician had bandaged the Duke's hands and declared the damage to the east wing contained to a single unused room, that Clara found him alone on the back terrace, staring out at the ruined edge of his house with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not coldness, not control, just exhaustion, and underneath it, something rawer. "You could have been hurt," she said before she could stop herself, "going up like that." "She is my brother's daughter," he said, not looking at her. "My brother is dead. I promised him I would keep her safe, and I meant it, and I will not be the man who breaks that promise because a door happened to jam on the worst possible night. No one would have blamed you for waiting for help. I would have blamed me." He said it so simply, so without performance, that Clara understood in that moment she was seeing something almost no one else at Ravenscroft was permitted to see. The real man beneath the cold Duke everyone whispered about. A man who measured his own worth entirely by how well he protected the people in his care, and who had, apparently, been failed by that same standard once before, badly enough that the failure still lived in his house like a second shadow. "Your brother," she said carefully, "Mrs. Prout told me not to mention him." His hands tightened on the stone railing. "My brother died 3 years ago. A riding accident, they call it, though there is more to it than that, and none of it is a story for tonight." He finally turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his face looked younger, stripped of all its careful control. "You did well tonight, Miss Hartley. The stairs. I would not have thought of them in time. I only remembered because I've spent a great deal of my life learning the fastest way out of a room." The words left her before she could catch them, and she saw him register them, saw the question form behind his eyes. But he did not ask it. He only nodded slowly, as though filing the information away somewhere careful, somewhere he kept the things that mattered. "Get some rest," he said. "Lily will want you at breakfast. She will not want to talk about tonight, and I would ask that you let her lead that conversation whenever she is ready to have it." "Of course." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name. "Thank you for remembering the stairs." "You're welcome, Your Grace." "Edmund," he said quietly, when there is no one else to hear it, "my name is Edmund." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all, only nodded and went inside, leaving him alone on the terrace with the smell of smoke still clinging to the night air. She lay awake a long time afterward, staring at her ceiling, thinking not about the fire, not about the danger, but about the sound of his voice cracking on his niece's name, and the careful way he had said thank you, as though gratitude were a language he had nearly forgotten how to speak. She told herself it meant nothing, that a man could be kind to a child and still be exactly the cold, guarded stranger she had met on her first night. She told herself this for several more days and found it harder to believe each time she tried. The days that followed the fire brought a strange new rhythm to the house. Edmund was not transformed, not suddenly warm or easy, but something had shifted in the way he looked at Clara across the breakfast table, something that lingered a half-second longer than it needed to before he returned to his correspondence. He began asking after Lily's lessons in the evenings, questions that somehow always seemed to include a second question about how Clara herself was settling in, though he never asked it directly. Lily, for her part, seemed to sense the change before either adult would admit to it. She had taken to holding Clara's hand at breakfast now, a small, fierce grip that said, without words, that she had decided Clara belonged to her, and Clara found she did not mind the claim at all. In the evenings, when Edmund read through the nursery wall, Clara caught herself listening for his voice the way one listens for a particular bird's song in a garden full of ordinary noise, easy to miss unless you already knew to want it. She was careful, though. She had learned caution the hard way, in a house where kindness had always come with a price attached, and she was not yet willing to believe that this house, this man, might be different. She kept to her work. She kept her eyes down in company, as Mrs. Prout had instructed on her first night, and she told herself, again and again, that whatever she was beginning to feel toward the Duke of Ravenscroft was nothing more than gratitude, and gratitude was a safe thing to feel, and she would not let it become anything more dangerous than that. She would later admit, not very good at keeping that particular promise to herself. The rumor reached Clara on a Tuesday, carried by a kitchen maid named Peggy, who clearly relished being the one to deliver it. "They're saying you've been writing letters," Peggy said, not looking up from the silver she was polishing, "to a gentleman in the village, telling him all sorts of things about this house, about his lordship's business." Clara set down the tray she was carrying with more force than she intended. "That's not true. I haven't written to anyone since I arrived." "Well, someone told Mrs. Prout you had, and Mrs. Prout told the steward, and the steward's just gone up to tell his lordship, so I'd brace myself if I were you." The summons came within the hour. Clara climbed the stairs to the study with her stomach in knots, rehearsing her defense, and found Edmund standing behind his desk with a letter in his hand that she had never seen before, his expression colder than she had seen it since her very first night at Ravenscroft. "Sit down," he said. "Your Grace, whatever you've been told, I have not." "Sit down, Miss Hartley." She sat. He did not. He came around the desk instead and stood over her, and for the first time since the fire, she saw the man everyone in the county whispered about, the Duke who had dismissed 3 companions before her without a second thought. This letter was found in the village post office, addressed to a Lord Sedgwick, describing in some detail my niece's habits, my household's finances, and the location of my late brother's private papers. It is signed with your name. I didn't write that. The handwriting is remarkably similar to yours. Then someone has forged it, because I swear to you on my mother's grave, I have not written a single letter since the night I arrived in your storm half drowned, with nothing but the clothes on my back and enough coin to last a fortnight. Her voice was shaking now, but not from fear, from something closer to fury, the particular fury of being disbelieved by someone whose good opinion had come to matter more than she had let herself admit. You may search my room. You may search anything you like. I have nothing to hide from you, your Grace, and I am tired, so very tired, of being accused of things I did not do simply because, It is easier to believe the worst of a woman with no family name to protect her. The room went very quiet. Edmund's jaw worked once, twice, and when he spoke again, some of the ice had gone out of his voice, replaced by something rawer. "Do you have any idea," he said slowly, "what it costs me every single time someone in this house proves themselves untrustworthy? Do you understand what happened the last time I trusted someone with the details of this household?" "No," Clara said, "because no one will tell me." He was silent for a long moment, staring at the letter in his hand as though it might rearrange itself into some more comfortable truth. Then, abruptly, he crossed to the window, his back to her, the same posture he had held the very first night they met. "Her name was Beatrice," he said. "We were engaged to be married 4 years ago before my brother died. I loved her, or believed I did, which perhaps amounts to the same foolishness in the end. I told her everything. My family's debts, which were considerable at the time. My brother's gambling, which was worse. The location of papers that in the wrong hands could have ruined this family entirely." He paused. "She sold every piece of it to a rival house before the ink on our engagement was even dry. My brother's debts became public knowledge within a fortnight. The shame of it, some say, is what drove him to ride out that night in weather no sensible man would have risked. I have never been able to prove it. I have also never been able to stop believing it." Clara's anger drained away all at once, replaced by something that ached in her chest. "Edmund, I am so sorry. I do not tell you this for sympathy." He turned back to face her, and his eyes were dry, controlled, but something underneath them was not. "I tell you so you understand why a forged letter with your name on it terrifies me more than it should. Why I came in here ready to believe the worst before I had even asked you a single question. It is not about you, Clara. It has never been about you. It is about a door in me that closed 4 years ago and has not opened since, no matter how much I have wanted it to." "Then let me help you find who really wrote that letter," Clara said. "Let me prove to you that this door can open again, and that not everyone on the other side of it is waiting to burn your house down for their own gain." He looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded moving across his face. "Why would you want to?" It was the question underneath all his questions, she realized. Not "why would you want to help me?" Why would anyone want to stay in a house this cold, with a man this guarded, when the whole world was full of easier places to be? And she understood, looking at him, that he needed the answer to matter as much as he needed the answer to be true. "Because I know what it is to be accused of things you did not do by people who were supposed to protect you instead," she said quietly. "My guardian, the man I fled the night I came here, he told the whole village I was ungrateful, difficult, that I invented the bruises to make him look cruel." Her voice caught, but she pushed through it because she had promised herself in the rain on that terrible road that she would not let fear silence her again. "He did not invent that story to hurt me, particularly. He invented it because it was easier than being seen for what he actually was. I think, perhaps, Beatrice's betrayal taught you the same lesson mine taught me, that the people who are supposed to love us can turn their own guilt into a weapon and aim it at whoever is standing closest." Edmund crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her chair, an act so far outside his usual careful control that Clara felt her breath catch entirely. "He hurt you," Edmund said. "It was not a question. For a long time, longer than I let myself admit, even to myself. Is that why you flinch sometimes, when a door closes too hard?" She had not known he'd noticed. Of course he had noticed. He noticed everything. "Yes. I am sorry," he said, "that anyone taught you to expect that in a place that should have been safe. I am sorry someone taught you the same, in a place that should have loved you honestly." They stayed like that for a long moment, close enough that Clara could see the small scar above his left eyebrow she had never noticed before, close enough to feel the warmth of him even without touching. Neither of them moved to close the distance further. It was not the moment for that, not yet, and some instinct in both of them seemed to understand it. "I will find out who wrote that letter," Edmund said finally, standing, some of his old composure returning like armor settling back into place. "And when I do, they will answer for it. But it will not be you, Clara. I should never have doubted that, not even for the length of time it took me to walk from my desk to this chair." "Thank you." "Do not thank me for the bare minimum of decency. You deserve considerably more than that, and one day I hope I am brave enough to offer it." He left the room before she could respond, and Clara sat alone in the study for a long while afterward, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing at all to do with fear. Something had shifted between them in that room, something neither of them had named aloud, but both of them had felt with equal weight. The wall he had built 4 years ago had not fallen, but a single stone had come loose, and Clara understood, sitting there in the fading afternoon light, that she wanted very badly to be the one who kept working at it, stone by careful stone, until the whole thing finally came down. The investigation into the letter took the better part of a week. It was Mrs. Prout in the end who uncovered the truth, cornering a young footman named Harold who had been quietly passing information to a man in the village for extra coin, a man who worked, it turned out, for Lord Sedgwick himself, a neighboring landowner who had made no secret of his interest in Ravenscroft's holdings, or more recently in Clara. Sedgwick had visited twice since Clara's arrival, ostensibly to discuss boundary disputes with Edmund, though his eyes had lingered on Clara both times in a way that made her skin crawl. It had not occurred to her, until Mrs. Prout laid out the truth, that his interest might have curdled into something more calculated. He had wanted information on Ravenscroft's finances, certainly, but he had also wanted Clara discredited, removed from the house, perhaps made desperate enough to accept whatever offer he intended to make her once she had nowhere else to turn. Edmund's reaction, when he learned the full truth, was quiet and cold in a way that frightened even the footman confessing to him. "You will pack your things and leave my land by morning," he told Harold, his voice perfectly level, which somehow made it worse than shouting would have. "And you will tell Lord Sedgwick, when next you see him, that if he sets foot on my property again, or sends so much as a single letter to any member of my household, I will ensure the whole county learns exactly what kind of man he is. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Get out of my sight." When the footman had gone, Edmund turned to Clara, who had been standing quietly by the door through the entire exchange, and something in his face softened entirely. "I am sorry," he said, "that he tried to use you as a weapon against this house. You did not ask to be caught in the middle of old grudges and older greed." "I am not so easily used as he hoped," Clara said. "I have had practice, standing my ground against men who thought me too small to fight back." "No," Edmund said, something like admiration warming his voice for the first time since she had known him. "You are not small at all, Clara Hartley. I think perhaps you are the strongest person in this house, and it has taken me entirely too long to see it clearly." She did not know how to answer that, so she simply held his gaze and let the silence say what neither of them was yet ready to put into plainer words. Outside, the last of the autumn light was fading gold across the gardens, and somewhere in the house, Lily's laughter rang out, bright and unafraid, and Clara thought, standing there, that whatever else this strange, cold house had cost her, it had also given her something she had never truly had before, somewhere to belong, someone worth trusting. And perhaps, though she was not yet brave enough to name it fully, someone worth loving. Lord Sedgwick, however, did not intend to let the matter rest so easily, and neither of them yet understood how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. The letter from Alistair Crane arrived on a gray morning 9 days later, and Clara knew, the moment she saw the seal, exactly whose hand had guided it there. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope before she even broke it open, and her hands went cold and steady in the particular way they always had, back in the old house, whenever she heard his footsteps on the stairs. She read the letter twice through in the privacy of her room, and then a third time, to be certain, She had not imagined the threat woven so carefully through its polite, formal language. He knew where she was. He demanded her immediate return, citing his rights as her legal guardian until her 21st birthday, still 4 months away. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he had recently corresponded with a Lord Sedgwick, who had been kind enough to inform him of her whereabouts, and who had expressed considerable sympathy for a man whose ward had run off in the night like a common thief, taking with her a ring of some sentimental value. Clara understood, reading those lines, exactly what had happened. Sedgwick, thwarted in his first attempt to discredit her, had simply found a more direct weapon. He had found the one man in the world with legal power over her, and handed him a map straight to her door. She did not tell Edmund immediately. She told herself she was protecting him from a problem that was hers alone to solve, but the truth, she admitted later, was simpler and more frightening. She was afraid that if he saw the letter, saw the truth of what she had run from, he would look at her differently. Less like a woman worth trusting with his household, and more like a problem that had followed her, uninvited, into his home. She was wrong about that, though she would not learn how wrong for 2 more days. Alistair Crane arrived at Ravenscroft on a cold afternoon, without warning, without an invitation, his carriage rolling up the long drive as though he had every right in the world to be there. Clara was in the garden with Lily when she heard the wheels on gravel, and something ancient and animal in her recognized the sound before her mind had fully caught up, and she was on her feet, pulling Lily behind her, before the carriage had even come to a full stop. "Clara," Lily said, alarmed by the sudden tension in her companion's grip, "what's wrong?" "Go inside, sweetheart. Find your uncle. Tell him there's a visitor, and tell him to come to the front garden right away." Lily, sensing the seriousness in Clara's voice, did not argue. She ran, small and fast, disappearing through the side door, and Clara stood alone in the garden as the carriage door opened, and Alistair Crane stepped down onto the gravel, exactly as she remembered him, tall and neat and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. "There you are," he said, as though she were a misplaced item he had finally located. "You have led me on quite a chase, Clara, running off in the middle of the night like some hysterical girl in a penny novel. I should think you'd be embarrassed. I am not going back with you. You do not have a choice in the matter. I'm still your legal guardian, and the law is entirely on my side, whatever fanciful stories you have told the people in this house." His eyes swept over the estate behind her, calculating, cold. "Quite the improvement in circumstances, I must say. I wonder what the Duke would think if he knew the true reason you left my house. Not cruelty, whatever you've claimed. Simple ingratitude and a taste for finer things than an honest man could provide." "That is a lie, and you know it." "It is my word against yours, and I believe most reasonable people will find my word considerably more credible than that of a runaway girl with no family, no fortune, and, I'm told, a rather convenient habit of finding wealthy men to shelter her." His mouth curled into something that was not quite a smile. "Now get your things. I have already spoken to the local magistrate about the matter, and he agrees I have every legal right to bring you home." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, the old fear rising up thick and choking, the old instinct to bend, to apologize, to make herself smaller so the danger would pass her by more gently. She felt her hands begin to shake, felt the ground beneath her feet grow strangely unsteady, and for one terrible moment she was certain she would simply fold, the way she always had before, the way 3 years of careful cruelty had trained her to fold. And then a hand closed around her shoulder, warm and steady, and Edmund stepped into the space beside her, his body angled slightly in front of hers, a barrier as clear and deliberate as any wall. "You are trespassing on my land," Edmund said, his voice carrying the particular cold precision Clara had heard only once before, the day he dismissed the footman who had betrayed them. "I suggest you return to your carriage before I have you removed from it." "And you are," Crane said, his composure flickering for the first time, "the Duke of Ravenscroft, I presume. "This does not concern you, your grace. Miss Hartley is my ward and I have come to collect her. Miss Hartley is a guest in my household, and she will leave it only when and if she chooses to do so. If you have some legal claim you believe entitles you to remove her against her will, I invite you to pursue it through the courts, where I promise you I have considerably more influence, more resources, and considerably more patience for a prolonged and public fight than you do." Edmund's eyes had gone flat and dangerous, the eyes of a man who had already decided the outcome of this conversation and was simply waiting for the other party to catch up. "I would also advise you to consider carefully what such a fight might reveal. About the bruises, 3 separate members of my household have already noted on Miss Hartley's arms upon her arrival here. About the physician's report I have already commissioned, documenting injuries consistent with prolonged mistreatment, dated to before her departure from your household. I have been quite thorough, Mr. Crane. I suspect you did not expect anyone to bother being thorough on her behalf." Clara stared at him, stunned. She had not known about the physician's report, had not known Edmund had been quietly building a case in her defense without ever once mentioning it, without ever making her relive the details, simply doing the work of protecting her in the background while she went about her days believing herself unwatched, uncounted, alone in her own history. Crane's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough to show the man underneath it. "You cannot prove any of that came from me. I do not need to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law today, Mr. Crane. I only need to make it considerably more expensive and considerably more public for you to pursue this than it is currently worth to you. I am a very wealthy man. I have a great deal of time, and even more patience for ruining anyone who threatens someone under my protection. I would ask you to consider whether Clara Hartley is truly worth that particular cost to you." The silence stretched long and taut between them, the whole garden holding its breath, and Clara watched Alistair Crane, the man who had haunted every corner of her mind for years, visibly calculate the value of his own pride against the promise of a long and expensive humiliation. He chose his pride, but only for a moment longer. "This is not finished," he said, retreating toward his carriage with as much dignity as he could gather. "You have not heard the last of me, Clara. Wealthy protectors have a way of losing interest once the novelty wears thin." "Get off my land," Edmund said, and something in his voice must have finally convinced Crane the conversation was truly over, because he climbed into his carriage without another word, and the wheels crunched away down the long gravel drive and did not return. Clara did not realize she was shaking until Edmund turned to face her fully, his expression no longer cold at all, but full of a fierce, careful tenderness she had never seen directed at her before. "You should have told me," he said quietly, "about the letter about him coming. I did not want you to see me the way he sees me, small, broken, a problem to be managed." "Clara," he took her hands gently, as though she were something precious that might shatter under too much pressure. "I do not see you as broken. I see you as the bravest person in this entire county, walking into my cold and grieving house as a stranger, and somehow finding the strength to bring warmth into every room you enter. I have spent 3 years building walls around myself, certain that letting anyone close would only end the way it ended with Beatrice, the way it ended with my brother. And then you arrived, half drowned in a storm, and asked me plain questions I had no good answers for, and somehow, without my permission, without my noticing, you found your way past every single one of those walls." "Edmund." "I am not finished," he said, though his voice had gone unsteady now, the careful control finally slipping entirely. "I have watched you with Lily, and I have watched the way this house has slowly come back to life since you arrived in it, and I have told myself again and again that it would be selfish and unfair to ask you to carry the weight of my grief along with your own. But I cannot pretend any longer, not after watching that man threaten to take you away from here, that I do not know exactly what I would lose if he succeeded." That evening, after the household had finally settled, After Lily had been read to sleep and the last of the fires banked low, Clara found herself unable to rest, the events of the day replaying over and over behind her eyes. She dressed and made her way down to the garden, needing air, needing space to simply breathe without the weight of the house pressing in around her, and found Edmund already there, standing exactly where he had stood that afternoon, facing the dark shape of the gates as though Crane might yet reappear out of the shadows. "Can't sleep either," she said softly. He turned, and in the moonlight his face looked open in a way she had rarely seen, all his careful armor set aside for just this one quiet hour. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if I had not reached the garden in time, if he had simply taken you, and I had been too late to stop it." "You were not too late." "I was nearly too late. 3 years I have spent guarding myself against exactly this feeling, Clara, this terror of losing something before I even had the courage to claim it. And today I understood all at once, standing in that garden, that I would rather feel this fear every single day for the rest of my life than go back to feeling nothing at all." He crossed the distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished it, and she did not step away. He raised a hand, gently, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch entirely. "You're safe here," he whispered, so quiet the words seemed meant only for the dark and the two of them within it. "Whatever he told you, whatever anyone has ever told you about what you deserve, you're safe here, Clara, with me, for as long as you wish to stay." She had heard those words before, in 100 different forms, from people who had not meant them, who had used safety as a leash rather than a gift. But something in the way Edmund said them, low and certain and entirely without performance, cracked something open in her chest that she had kept carefully sealed for years. And for the first time since she had climbed into that carriage in the storm, Clara allowed herself to simply believe him. "I know," she said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it completely. Neither of them spoke again for a long while, standing together in the quiet garden beneath a sky finally clear of storms, and somewhere behind them, in a house that had spent 3 years learning how to hold its breath, something that had been broken for a very long time began, slowly and carefully, to heal. But Alistair Crane had not made his final visit to Ravenscroft, and Lord Sedgwick had not yet played his last card, and the peace of that quiet garden would not last nearly as long as either of them hoped. The final threat came not from Crane directly, but from the alliance he and Sedgwick had quietly built in the weeks since their separate failures, and it arrived with none of the warning either previous confrontation had offered. Clara learned of it from Mrs. Prout, who came to her one morning with an expression Clara had never seen on the housekeeper's normally composed face, something close to fear. "There's men at the gate," Mrs. Prout said. "A magistrate from the next county over and Mr. Crane beside him, and Lord Sedgwick's carriage just behind. They're asking for you by name, and they've brought papers." Clara's stomach dropped. "What kind of papers?" "I don't know, miss, but his lordship's already gone down to meet them, and I think you'd best come too, before this gets settled without you having any say in it." Clara found Edmund in the entrance hall, his face set in the cold, controlled expression she now recognized as the mask he wore when he was most afraid, and beside him stood a stranger in official dress, a leather folder tucked beneath his arm, and behind them both, framed in the open doorway, Alistair Crane and Lord Sedgwick stood together like men who believed they had already won. "Miss Hartley," the magistrate said, stepping forward, "I am given to understand there is a dispute regarding your legal guardianship. Mr. Crane here has filed a formal petition for your immediate return, citing abandonment of his household and theft of property, specifically a ring belonging to your late mother, which he claims was given to you only in trust, not as an outright gift." "That ring was my mother's," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "She gave it to me herself before she died. It was never his to claim." That is precisely the sort of assertion this proceeding exists to examine, the magistrate said, not unkindly, but with the flat neutrality of a man who had heard every kind of desperate claim before and had learned to trust none of them without proof. Mr. Crane has also raised concerns regarding your current living situation, suggesting it may be, and I quote, morally irregular, given your unmarried status and the Duke's unmarried status, residing under the same roof without proper chaperonage. Sedgwick, standing just behind Crane, wore a small, satisfied smile that told Clara exactly whose idea that particular accusation had been. Edmund's hand found hers, steady and sure, and he stepped forward before she could speak. Miss Hartley's residence in my household has been entirely proper from the first day of her employment as companion to my niece, a fact to which my entire staff can attest, and which I am prepared to swear to under oath, in any court you care to name. His voice was even, but Clara could feel the barely restrained fury beneath it. As for the matter of the ring, I have already commissioned an independent appraisal, along with a full accounting of Mr. Crane's financial records for the past 3 years, records which I obtained, quite legally, through a solicitor in the city with a talent for uncovering exactly the sort of debts a man like Mr. Crane prefers to keep hidden. Crane's face went pale. You have no right to investigate my private affairs. I have every right to investigate the affairs of any man who threatens someone under my protection, Edmund said. And what my solicitor discovered, Mr. Crane, is considerably more interesting than one small ring. Gambling debts, considerable ones, dating back nearly 4 years. A pattern of borrowing against Ward's inheritances that has apparently followed you through no fewer than 3 separate guardianships before Miss Hartley's, each of which ended rather abruptly, and each of which I am now prepared to have thoroughly investigated, should you continue to pursue this particular petition. The magistrate's expression had shifted from neutral curiosity to something sharper, more attentive, and Clara watched Crane's carefully constructed composure begin to crumble in real time, watched the calculating cruelty that had defined her entire childhood suddenly look small and frightened in the face of consequences he had clearly never expected to face. This is a fabrication, Crane said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence entirely. A wealthy man's attempt to bully an honest guardian out of his rightful claim. Then you will have no objection to my solicitor presenting the full documentation to this magistrate, Edmund said. Along with the physician's report documenting Miss Hartley's injuries upon her arrival at Ravenscroft, and sworn statements from 3 members of my staff who witnessed the bruising firsthand, and, should it prove necessary, testimony from your 2 previous wards, both of whom my solicitor has already located, and both of whom, I am told, have quite a lot to say about the nature of your guardianship. Once they were assured they would not have to fear your retaliation for speaking honestly. The silence that followed was absolute. Sedgwick had gone very still in the doorway, his satisfied smile long since vanished, and Crane stood frozen between the magistrate and the Duke, a cornered man finally understanding the size of the trap he had walked into. I believe, the magistrate said slowly, that this petition may require considerably more scrutiny than I initially anticipated. Mr. Crane, I would strongly advise you to withdraw it before the details you've just heard become a matter of formal record. Crane's jaw worked silently for a long moment, and then, all at once, the fight seemed to go out of him entirely, replaced by something smaller and more desperate. I withdraw the petition, he said quietly. And the ring, Edmund said, which was never yours to claim in the first place. Fine, the ring as well. And you will not contact Miss Hartley again in any form for any reason, or I promise you the full weight of everything my solicitor has uncovered will find its way into public record within the week. Edmund's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Do we understand each other? Yes, Crane's voice was barely above a whisper now, We understand each other." He turned and left without another word, moving past Sedgwick without so much as a glance. And Sedgwick, seeing the entire scheme collapse in real time, found his own composure evaporating rapidly. "This changes nothing regarding the boundary dispute between our estates," Sedgwick said stiffly, attempting to salvage some scrap of dignity from the wreckage. "It changes everything," Edmund said. "I am no longer inclined toward generosity with a neighbor who conspired to have an innocent woman falsely discredited, and then handed her whereabouts to a man he had every reason to know was dangerous. You will find my solicitor considerably less accommodating in all future dealings, Lord Sedgwick, and I would advise you to consider very carefully whether Ravenscroft is a house you wish to remain at odds with." Sedgwick's mouth opened, then closed again, and he retreated to his carriage with none of the confidence he had arrived with, and within minutes both carriages were rolling away down the long drive, leaving Ravenscroft's gates empty and quiet behind them. The magistrate lingered only long enough to confirm the withdrawal of the petition in writing, and then he too departed, and Clara found herself standing in the entrance hall, shaking with the sudden absence of a fear she had carried for so long she had nearly forgotten what its absence might feel like. "It's over," she said, as though testing the words for truth. "He can't touch me anymore." "He cannot," Edmund confirmed. "I made certain of that before he ever arrived at those gates. I have been building that case for weeks, since the night he first came here, quietly, so as not to frighten you before it was ready. You did all of that for me. I would do considerably more than that for you." He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression had shifted entirely from the cold, controlled Duke of her first night into someone she barely recognized, open and unguarded and utterly without armor. "Clara, I have spent 3 years believing that love was simply a debt waiting to be called in, that anyone I let close enough would eventually find some way to use that closeness against me. You have shown me, every single day since you arrived in that storm, that I was wrong, that love does not have to be a weapon, that it can simply be a shelter, freely given, asking nothing in return but the courage to accept it." "Edmund, I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since the night of the fire, perhaps before, though I did not have the courage to name it until this very moment. I do not ask you to feel the same, not yet, not until you are ready. I only ask that you allow me the chance to prove, every day for as long as you'll let me, that this house and this heart, however clumsily guarded, are truly yours." Clara felt tears rise, unbidden, not from grief this time, but from something so full it had nowhere else to go. "I stopped fearing you a long time ago," she said. "Longer than I let myself admit, even to myself. I think I started falling in love with you the night you climbed that iron staircase for Lily, bleeding and afraid, and utterly certain you would not fail her. I have simply been too frightened ever since to believe that a man like you could want someone like me, with no family, no fortune, nothing to offer but gratitude and whatever courage I managed to scrape together along the way." "You have offered me considerably more than gratitude," Edmund said, closing the last small distance between them. "You have offered me a reason to open every door I closed 4 years ago. You have offered my niece a version of joy I feared she might never know again. You have offered this entire house a warmth it had forgotten it was capable of holding. I do not need your fortune, Clara. I have more of that than any man could reasonably use. I need only you, exactly as you are, for as long as you will have me." She answered him not with words, but by closing the distance herself, and he met her halfway, and the kiss that followed carried none of the caution either of them had guarded so carefully for weeks, only the quiet, certain relief of two people who had each spent years believing themselves unworthy of exactly this kind of gentleness, finally allowing themselves to receive it. Somewhere above them, unseen, a small girl watched from the top of the stairs, having crept out of the nursery at the sound of carriages, and smiled the particular smile of a child who has just watched something long broken finally begin to mend. The wedding took place the following spring, small and quiet, exactly as Clara had asked for, held in the garden where Edmund had first whispered those words that changed everything. Lily walked ahead of her down the garden path, scattering flower petals with the fierce concentration of a child who had appointed herself in charge of the entire event. And Mrs. Prout cried without any attempt to hide it. And the portrait of Edmund's brother in the East Gallery was, for the first time in 3 years, uncovered and spoken of openly, remembered with grief that no longer had to hide itself in silence. Alastair Crane was never heard from again, his reputation quietly ruined by the very records Edmund had threatened to make public, records that surfaced regardless once his 2 previous wards, freed at last from fear of retaliation, chose to speak openly about the guardian who had failed them all. Lord Sedgwick's boundary dispute was settled that same year, entirely in Ravenscroft's favor, and he did not trouble the estate again. Clara Hartley, who had arrived at Ravenscroft half-drowned and utterly alone, believing herself unworthy of safety, became its duchess, its heart, and the woman who finally taught a grieving house how to breathe again. She never forgot the fear that had once ruled every corner of her life, the flinch at raised voices, the old instinct to make herself smaller to survive another day. But she learned, slowly and carefully, in the warmth of a house that had once seemed the coldest place in the world, that fear did not have to be the only thing that shaped her. Some nights, long after Lily had grown old enough to no longer need a bedtime story, Clara would still hear Edmund's voice through the nursery wall out of pure habit, reading to whatever small child happened to occupy that room in later years, his voice steady and warm in a way it had never been on the night they first met. And some nights, when the old fears crept back despite everything, despite the years of proof that she was truly, finally safe, he would simply take her hand in the dark and repeat the same 4 words that had first cracked her heart wide open in that quiet garden. "You're safe here," he would say, and every single time she believed him completely.